Kia ora, koe Smithahu. Nā mai ki te whare, welcome to the House. This is Parliament's 7th week this year. Yes, it probably feels a lot longer. And not just for you. It almost certainly feels longer for at least one MP. And I'm thinking of the Speaker, Jerry Brownlee, who is beginning to carry the look of a teacher who knows that control of his classroom is slipping away.
Tell you what, I'm absolutely sick of this. It's schoolyard stupidity and it's got to stop. So we'll now go to question number... A point of order.
As it happens, he and I both have spent time in front of a classroom. He much more than I. But I can promise you, it's not a great feeling to wonder if you're losing control.
How many times do I have to say, don't bring attacks on opposition members into it before I take some action? I'll get a ton of letters tomorrow saying I've been far too lenient, so I won't be from this point on.
As the Speaker suggested there himself, the problem may be that he really is being very lenient and generous. In today's question time, he pretty much answered one of the Prime Minister's questions for him, though some might argue they were both incorrect.
The government is currently consulting on a proposal to increase household insurance costs by $400 to $948 per year per household.
The question is the government or a government agency?
It's a government agency. But that is the government.
Well, if it has a separate board, then the board would make a decision. But Prime Minister might want to make that distinction.
It's a government agency. They have a separate board. They can make their own decision.
It did at least garner something of an answer. Most question times get really rowdy, and that's especially true if answers glide neatly away from the actual questions to talk about something else entirely.
What I can say is, but what I am proud about, I would just say to that member, his government's legacy. But I am proud because that was a shameful, shameful result from a Labour government. I am not taking any lectures from that member. This is a strange line of questioning. Well, again, I was just say to the member...
But that's not entirely unusual. Current feelings might be elevated because many of those alternative answers are attacks on the opposition, which is not entirely kosher. Something the Speaker does pick up on from time to time. But his reprovings might be part of the problem. They say, never make a threat you won't follow up on. Or as the Speaker said himself earlier...
How many times do I have to say, don't bring attacks on opposition members into it before I take some action?
I think that was rhetorical. It seems that during most question times, the Speaker gets frustrated. He tells people that this must stop. This is the last time. The final warning. The next person who... and so on. Don't believe me, though. Here are a few more from this last week.
The answer is not acceptable, so we have no more of that. There's been a little bit of a move towards personal reflections, which are completely unacceptable under our standing orders, so they are to stop. I just make the point that that's the last time someone is going to use a point of order to attack another part of the House. That's not acceptable. Put your hands up. Who wants to go? I've made the point, and I think people should just take it on board. If there is another attack on the other side as a result of an answer to a question, the person making that attack will be leaving the House for a period of time. We're about to go into an absolutely silent question time if that sort of racket keeps up. Those sort of questions are going to be dealt with very severely from this point.
You get the idea. And were they dealt with severely? No. Did anyone get kicked out? No. They're not all for the same infraction, it has to be said, but many are. The things that have got the Speaker's goat most often recently are government ministers answering opposition questions by attacking the opposition, and government ministers asking patsy questions, or making points of order, to attack the opposition. Oh, and even worse, under Parliament's rules, government ministers asking their colleagues patsy questions in order to make personal attacks on members of the opposition. The last of those clips is worth revisiting with a little context for better understanding. So here from last Tuesday is David Seymour asking a question of the Prime Minister during a series of questions from Green co-leader Chloe Swarbrick.
Could failing to understand that be a reason why someone's one-time business, a little hole-in-the-wall cafe on Mount Eden Road, only lasted a few weeks?
No.
Now that question led to Jerry Brownlee's reminder you heard earlier of the ban on personal reflections. And then this Tuesday, Late in question time, and after a number of other warnings, there was this patsy question to the Prime Minister from Nicola Willis, also during a set of questions from Chloe Swarbrick.
Does the Prime Minister agree that the profit motive is a key principle of a capitalist market economy? And would he advocate other forms of economic philosophy, such as, for example, Marxism?
I don't know. I'm sorry. That was asking the Prime Minister. Was asking the Prime Minister to answer a question for which he has no responsibility. He may have an opinion, but not as a Prime Minister. Those sort of questions are going to be dealt with very severely from this point.
You can just feel the punishment coming, can't you? Except if I hadn't paused the tape there, the very next thing you would have heard was this.
Submit a question.
Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Does the Prime Minister or any member of his cabinet intend to take the views of someone who started a small business which went bust in about 5 weeks and then come to this Parliament and start preaching to the rest of us?
Well, that breaks at least 3 rules or rulings, all of which you've heard warnings against just in this programme. It's not the PM's responsibility, it's a supplementary asked solely to attack the opposition, and most seriously, it's a personal reflection. The exact same one that was warned against severely a week previously. So, did Winston Peters need to brace himself?
I doubt he has any particular responsibility for that.
No withdrawal, no apology, no punishment. That will definitely teach him. Now, speaking of House rules and potentially actual consequences, a major story from Parliament this week was from Parliament's Privileges Committee, Parliament's own ersatz court, where a cross-party group of senior MPs consider whether their colleagues, or even non-MPs, may have badly broken Parliament's own rules, something called a breach of privilege. The story this week related to an ongoing stout between 3 MPs from Te Patu Māori and the Privileges Committee about how a privileges hearing would be conducted. It culminated in the MPs failing to turn up to the hearing, which was looking into the first reading of the Treaty Principles Bill, when those MPs, at the point that their party could vote, instead contributed a haka on the floor of the chamber, which some might consider a pretty definitive vote, but not necessarily one within the rules, something that the committee was asked to investigate. There's been a lot of talk about the story, but I thought some background to the committee and its role and how it works might be helpful. So I sat down with the Clerk of the House of Representatives, David Wilson. He runs Parliament's Secretariat, the Office of the Clerk, and advises MPs on the rules. In fact, he wrote the guide to how Parliament works.
The Privileges Committee gets its work by being referred things by the Speaker.
Yeah.
Questions of privilege, so things for it to decide on, where the Speaker says on the face of it, there looks like there might be a breach of Parliament's rules here, and is serious enough to want to ask the Privileges Committee to look at it.
Yeah.
It gets that referral from the Speaker, thinks about what to do. Typically that will involve inviting the party that's accused of breaking the rules, and I mean party in the broad sense of person or people, not just political parties, but anyone who might have been alleged to have broken the rules to appear before the committee, explain that and answer questions. Sometimes they will do it just in writing where it seems quite straightforward, or if it's a MP who already admits that they accept they've done something wrong, they might deal with it just on paper. But otherwise they'll have a hearing which is open to the public, generally reported by the news media, where the member or members will be questioned. It's not only MPs that go to the Privileges Committee though, anyone can be referred there, but more often than not it is MPs because they're the ones who work within the framework of Parliament's rules and so are more likely to infringe them.
Yes, that's true, and often work closer to the edge because that's just
right.
what their job involves.
Yeah.
I should have started a stage earlier than that and noted why there is one and what the kind of rules are. So Parliament itself and the MPs within it have particular and extra rights and privileges in relation to the general law and the sorts of things that are allowed to do as part of their job or in the House. But there's a sort of a balancing of that there's also rules for what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, what's good form, basically, and what's not, right?
Yeah, that's right. And the key sort of privilege that members have in debate in the House and in select committees is the right of free speech.
Yeah.
And that no legal action can be taken against anything they say in those settings. So balancing that, Parliament has agreed some rules, some limits around that. There are a few things that you can't say. can't make offensive reflections against the monarch or the judiciary, for example. You can't accuse another member of being a liar. So although the right of free speech is very broad, it's not absolute, because the Parliament as a whole has, by consensus, agreed to put some limits on it. The other thing they've agreed is that there needs to be a body to investigate apparent breaches of those privileges and rules. And that is the Privileges Committee, which is a multi-party committee with representation from every party in Parliament. Generally, it's chaired by the Attorney-General, and most of the members on it are senior members from the various parties.
It's a committee where the government would normally have a majority, isn't it?
There's no requirement that they will, but they frequently do.
Historically speaking, have parties of any government in the past, have they sort of privileged themselves in the hearings, or unprivileged others, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand. And I mean, it is always a risk where most things in Parliament can happen by a majority, and the government always holds a majority or it ceases to be a government. But that's not what's happened in the Privileges Committee, either in my direct experience or my knowledge of what's happened previously. The members in it tend to work collegially as a whole for the good of Parliament. It's very rare for them to vote on anything. If they were to, a majority rules, but they don't. They tend to try and reach a consensus agreement that everyone, even if everyone doesn't love, that everyone is happy with.
I've watched them working in the open part of it, which is when they're hearing witnesses. Select committees are not as party political as the House is, and the Privileges Committee and the Standing Orders Committee, for that matter, are even less so. They're much more kind of working together for the good of the general Parliament. At least that's been my observation.
Yeah, I think that's a fair reflection. And although both of those committees you mentioned, Privileges and Standing Orders, could decide things by majority, in practice they don't, because you really need to have the huge bulk of Parliament, or ideally all of it, agreeing that what's happening is the right thing.
And that takes us to the point that actually MPs all do agree to what the rules are when they turn up, don't they?
They do. The rules are theirs. They're made by MPs at the end of the previous Parliament, and they're agreed by consensus across the House. So they're very much the rules of all members of the House.
Yeah. Okay, so in a Privileges Committee outcome, they vary enormously.
I mean, there are a range of penalties. There are some that are typically applied, requiring someone to apologise to the House or censuring them. Those have been penalties usually applied to MPs. They could be applied to other people, though. Suspension from the service of the House, which is a time where a member can't take part in any of the proceedings, they can't vote, and they're not paid. Yeah, there is the ability to impose a fine of up to $1,000. And there is a theoretical power to imprison. It's never been used in New Zealand. It was inherited from the UK because these privileges that we talked about came from the UK Parliament in 1865, and that was one that was usable and in use in the UK at the time, and it never has been in New Zealand.
They'd done it thousands of times in the UK, but mostly a few hundred years before that.
That's right, yeah, and it's difficult to imagine something like that happening in a modern environment.
Yeah. There's another one that was, in theory, picked up from the UK, but has never been considered to actually be true here. In fact, I think it's been sort of ruled out in legislation, and that is sacking an MP. The House cannot sack MPs, can they?
No. In fact, when legislation was passed in 2014, the Parliamentary Privileges Act, it explicitly said that the House can't do that. Only voters can choose who's going to be an MP, and ultimately voters choose if someone's not going to be one anymore. There are a few other ways. Of course, an MP can resign. If they're convicted of a serious offence, they can lose their seat. And there are a few other things that can cause them to lose their seat. But very much it's rooted in that democratic principle that the voting public chooses who MPs are.
We're a little bit unusual in that. Westminster can get rid of people. The American, they can vote on getting rid of someone out of Congress. It's actually not uncommon around the world, but not here.
No, that's right, not here.
Yeah. The process of the Privileges Committee, I was reading your parliamentary practice and what have you, and there's 4 chapters on privilege and the Privileges Committee and how it all, but there's no outline of exactly how they do their job. Do they just sort of decide that as they go? Is it tradition?
Yeah, well, I think that's true of all committees and not just the Privileges Committee. In parliamentary practice in New Zealand, there isn't a description of exactly how committees work because it is up to them within the framework that's provided in standing orders, and each develops their own way of working. But for the Privileges Committee, I think it would be fair to say the normal way of operating would be to receive a referral from the Speaker, to consider how to approach it, generally then to hear evidence, think about what, if any, breaches of privilege or contempts of Parliament have occurred, apply a test to decide if that thing has happened or not, and then if it decides it has, to report that along with some recommended penalty usually, or if it decides it hasn't, then to report that. Either way, it needs to report the matter back to the House. If those findings are going to be damaging to the reputation of the person concerned, they give them a chance to respond before they report to the House. But ultimately, the Privileges Committee's job is to report to the House and make recommendations. Like any other committee, it's the House that decides whether to accept that report, so if someone is guilty of a contempt or a breach of privilege, and if so, whether to apply the recommended penalty.
It's true, that goes back before the entire House. It's not just the committee that decides. They report back and then it's voted on, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's often reported that the committee is powerful and can do those things. It can't. The only power it actually has that other committees don't have is it can compel people to appear before it.
Although it almost never does that either.
It doesn't need to. People usually come, I don't know if willingly is the right word, but they agree to come. And the only people it can't compel to attend are other members of Parliament. Only the House can do that.
That was David Wilson, the Clerk of the House of Representatives, and I hope that gives you some context to what's a fascinating situation. You've been listening to The House. E te whakarongo koe ki te whare. This program is produced with funding from Parliament's Office of the Clerk. Mā te wā.